All right, so today
Okay.
we are diving into
Sounds good.
the Iraq War.
Okay.
Um, More specifically, the time leading up to the 2003 Iraq War.
Right.
And we're going to be focusing on
Yeah.
the UK perspective.
Okay.
And to do that, we're going to be using declassified government documents,
Okay.
primarily from the Chilcot inquiry.
Right. So
Yeah, this will be good. You've expressed some interest in this
I did
in the
something with
past
this.
about like how did the UK get involved in this whole thing?
Yeah.
And I think these documents will really
Yeah.
help clarify that.
Absolutely.
So to set the stage,
Okay.
it's April 2002.
Okay.
What's going on?
Well, you've got this incredibly tense global atmosphere, right? I mean, the world is still reeling from 9/11.
Right.
The U.S. is becoming more and more fixated on Iraq, on Saddam Hussein, and the potential threat they believe he poses.
Right.
And the UK, well, they're caught in a tricky spot. They're a close ally of the U.S.
Right.
But they've also got some serious reservations about international law
Right.
and, frankly, what their own public back home might think
Right. Yeah, definitely.
about getting involved in another war.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So it's a delicate balancing act for them.
So were there any like early warning signs
Oh, absolutely.
from the UK's perspective
Yeah.
that this might not
Oh, yeah, for sure.
be the best idea?
Yeah. So in April of '02,
Okay.
you have the UK's Joint Intelligence Committee, the JIC.
Okay.
They released this assessment.
Right.
And it wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement of a U.S.-led invasion.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, in fact, they actually highlighted that a lot of regional powers
Okay.
actually preferred the idea of UN inspections in Iraq.
Instead of military action.
Exactly.
Interesting.
They were worried about the potential for, like, massive instability
Right.
if the U.S. just went in guns blazing.
Yeah.
And they even specifically mentioned Jordan as a country that
Yeah.
could be particularly vulnerable.
Interesting.
But here's the thing, and this is a big one.
Okay.
The JIC also said that the evidence for Iraq actually having these infamous WMDs,
Right.
it wasn't a slam dunk. They literally said it needed to be much stronger.
Wow. So even
So right from the get-go.
at that point,
Yeah. There were
serious doubts
doubts, yeah.
in the UK's own intelligence community. Wow. And were there any specific concerns that they raised that really stood out to you?
You know, one of the things that I found really interesting was just how much they emphasized the potential for, like, regional fallout.
Okay.
Like, what happens if this thing kicks off a chain reaction? What are the unintended consequences?
Right.
It suggests a much more cautious approach than what we usually associate with this period.
Right. And this is all happening
Oh, yeah.
while Blair is super pro going through the UN for this.
Right.
So that's all it's-
So what was his...
I mean, it seems like he's really trying to pump the brakes here.
Yeah.
But Blair's over here saying, no, we need the UN.
Yeah.
We need that international legitimacy.
Interesting.
And he's got his reasons.
What were they?
So Blair was convinced that getting a UN Security Council resolution.
Was absolutely essential, and for two main reasons.
Okay.
One, to build a broad international coalition.
Okay.
He knew that any action against Iraq
Right.
had to have that global buy-in.
Yeah.
And second, a UN resolution would provide legal cover for military action.
Right.
He knew that acting unilaterally without the UN would be incredibly risky politically and legally.
Definitely for the UK.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They couldn't afford to be seen as just blindly following the U.S.
Right. Right.
They needed that international cover.
Yeah, so that puts the UK in a tough spot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you've got the US who wants to move quickly,
Yeah, they're raring to go.
and the UK is kind of saying, whoa, hold on.
Yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Let's think about this. What are the consequences?
Yeah, are we really ready for this?
Right.
And that difference in pace, that tension between these two allies,
Yeah.
that's going to be a constant theme.
Right.
And it's not just between the U.S. and the U.K. Even within the U.K. government itself,
Right.
there were anxieties.
What kind of anxiety?
Well, one of the big ones was this lack of a clear day-after plan from the U.S.
What do you mean?
Okay, so say they go in,
Right.
they take out Saddam.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Right.
What's the plan for stabilizing Iraq?
Mm-hmm.
How long is the UK going to be expected to stick around?
Yeah, were they asking those questions?
Oh, yeah. These were all questions that, from the UK's perspective at least, didn't seem to have satisfactory answers.
So they just felt rushed.
To put it mildly.
What?
Yeah, and then you've got figures like Sir Richard Dearlove.
Okay.
He was the head of MI6.
Right.
He comes back from a trip to Washington in July of '02.
Okay.
And he's described as being deeply concerned by what he saw over there.
What was he concerned about?
The documents suggest that he picked up on this really dangerous momentum
Okay.
within the Bush administration.
Okay.
It was like they were so fixated on military action
Right.
that they were kind of becoming blind to the risks.
Wow.
There's even a quote from one of Dearlove's colleagues
Okay.
who said that Dearlove felt like things were being fixed in the intelligence and diplomatic process to make the case for war.
Things were being fixed.
Yeah, it's a very loaded statement.
What does that even mean?
Well, unfortunately, the documents don't get into specifics.
Right.
But it definitely suggests that there was this deep unease within British intelligence
Right.
about how intelligence was being used or
Right.
maybe even manipulated
Right.
to build a case for war that they weren't entirely convinced by.
Wow. And on top of all of this, we haven't even touched on Iraq's alleged links to terrorism,
Right.
which the U.S. was using as one of their main justifications for war, at least publicly.
Yeah, and that was another major point of contention.
It was.
Oh, yeah.
The U.S. intelligence seemed pretty convinced that
Yeah.
there was the direct link between Saddam Hussein and groups like al-Qaeda.
Mm-hmm.
But the UK, they were much more skeptical.
Really?
Yeah. They didn't rule it out completely,
Right.
but they definitely weren't convinced.
Interesting.
And again, it just highlights this difference in perspective,
Right.
this difference in how they were reading the intelligence,
Yeah.
which, as you can imagine, is going to have huge implications down the line.
So you've got all of these internal doubts,
Yeah.
concerns about the U.S.'s motives,
Mm-hmm.
their evidence.
Yeah.
And then to make matters even more complicated, the UK gets this legal opinion from their top legal advisor, Lord Goldsmith.
All right. Yeah.
And it throws a wrench in everything.
This does, doesn't it?
What does it say? So Goldsmith's advice is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
He basically says that without a new UN Security Council resolution,
Right.
one that explicitly authorizes military action,
Okay.
any use of force against Iraq
Yeah.
would be illegal under international law.
Wow. Straight up.
So that's a problem.
A bit of a snag in the plan, you could
Yeah.
say. Yeah. So that's got to be a tough pill to swallow for Blair, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's trying to balance this incredibly important alliance with the U.S.
Right.
with international law,
Mm-hmm.
public opinion
Right.
back home.
Yeah.
So he needs to find a way to justify military action
Yeah.
doesn't alienate everyone on the world stage.
Right. Or make the UK look bad.
Exactly.
So what does he do?
Well, he decides to take it back to the UN Security Council.
Okay.
The goal is to get a new resolution, one
Okay.
that gives Saddam Hussein one last chance
Right.
to comply with the UN's demands on weapons inspections
Right. Yeah.
and disarmament.
So is that realistic at that point?
It's hard to say. I
Yeah.
mean, there was definitely genuine concern within the UK government about the risks of invasion, the lack of a plan for what happens after Saddam.
Right. Right.
So on the one hand, Blair's tried to buy some time,
Right.
explore all the diplomatic options.
Yeah.
But he also knows he has to present a united front with the U.S.
Right.
and try to persuade the world that action against Iraq is justified.
So is that where that UK dossier on Iraq's WMD program comes in?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's September 2002.
Right.
They released this dossier.
Right.
And they claim it's got compelling evidence
All right.
that Saddam Hussein is developing WMDs,
Right.
posing a threat to everyone.
But didn't that dossier turn out to be pretty controversial?
That's one way to put it.
What happened?
Well, there were a lot of accusations
Like what?
that the Blair government had basically exaggerated the intelligence.
Really?
Yeah, to make their case for war stronger.
Wow. So it backfired.
Pretty much, yeah. The Chilcot inquiry later found that while there wasn't deliberate falsification,
Okay.
they did present their judgments about Iraq's capabilities with way too much certainty.
Oh, so they oversold it.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So you have all this going on.
Yeah.
And then on top of that,
Oh, yeah. There's more.
what?
The UN Security Council is divided
On what?
how to proceed with Iraq.
Okay.
France is pushing back against the U.S.
What are they saying?
They want a more cautious approach.
Okay.
2 resolutions.
What do you?
One demanding Iraq cooperates with weapons inspectors,
Okay.
and a second one
Yeah.
only authorizing force if they refuse.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
But the U.S., they want one resolution,
Oh.
and they want it to be a tough one.
So where does the UK fall in all of this?
They're stuck in the middle trying to play peacemaker,
Right.
but also under immense pressure from the U.S.
Right.
to back them up.
So which side do they take?
They end up supporting the U.S.
Really?
Yeah, they push for a single resolution.
Even though they were just advocating for going slow?
They were.
Oh,
But
well,
this resolution, it's got some major ambiguities.
what do you mean ambiguities?
So it's not exactly clear
About what?
what would actually justify military action.
Okay, so you're telling me
This is where things get messy.
this resolution
Yeah.
that's supposed to be the thing everyone agrees on
Right.
is unclear.
Yeah, Resolution 1441,
Okay,
the one that passes in November of 2002,
right.
it's a masterclass in diplomatic ambiguity.
So they basically wrote a vague document
Essentially, yes.
that could lead to war.
It demands that Iraq cooperates with UN weapons inspectors,
Okay.
but it's super vague
About what?
about what a material breach actually is.
What does that mean?
So basically, what would Iraq have to do
Right,
for it to be considered serious enough to justify military action?
right.
They don't say.
They leave it open-ended.
Yeah. And to make matters worse,
There's more.
even within the UK government,
Okay.
people can't agree on what the resolution actually means.
Wow, so they're all on the same side.
Right.
Supposedly.
And they
Can't even agree.
Exactly.
Right.
Some officials argued that it didn't automatically authorize military action,
Okay.
that they'd need another UN resolution for that.
Okay.
But others thought this resolution was enough.
Wow, so even within their own government.
Total disagreement
But
could
sure.
on a really important issue.
Yeah. So it's like they set out to write this really clear document,
Right.
this resolution, to get everyone on the same page.
Right.
And it ends up being anything but clear.
Yeah, it's like they tried to make something that was simple.
Yeah.
Way too complicated.
Yeah. And what's crazy is that,
And you can't do that with something like this.
no,
When you're talking about potentially going to war,
right.
clarity is essential.
Right. Because like you said, it's not a yes or no question.
Exactly.
It's not that simple.
It's so much messier than that.
Right.
And these documents really show
Yeah.
that they reveal just how much anxiety there was
Right.
within the UK government.
About the whole thing.
Yeah, they knew the risks of military action,
Right.
but at the same time...
Diplomacy is hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And especially when you're dealing with a superpower like the U.S.,
Right.
that pretty much already has their mind made up.
It's like they get to a certain point and there's no turning back.
It seems that way.
So where does that leave us?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that there are rarely easy answers
Yeah.
when it comes to understanding history,
Right?
especially something as complex as the Iraq War.
Right. Because we tend to look at it as yes or no.
Exactly.
Was it the right decision or the wrong decision?
Right. And it's so much more than that.
Right. And you could see from these documents
Yeah.
that it wasn't just a straight line.
No, they were looking for other solutions.
Oh, no, but until the end.
They were trying to find another way,
Yeah.
but it just wasn't meant to be.
And that's kind of the tragedy of it all, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, they knew the risks.
Yeah.
They documented them.
Yeah.
They talked about them.
They did everything but stop it.
It seems that way.
So what's the final thought?
What should we all be thinking about after listening to this?
Yeah, like what's the thing that's going to keep us up at night?
I think it's this. The road to the Iraq War was paved with good intentions, genuine fears,
Okay.
and a whole lot of miscalculations and misjudgments.
So basically, we should all just try to learn from the past.
Learn from the past and recognize that it's never as simple as it seems.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time.